This story is quite dark and mysterious, and it features a very old English game, which we call football, and in America, known as soccer. Many centuries ago, in the time of knights and dragons, three brothers and their sister were playing football on a green in front of a church. The youngest, whose name was Roland, was the most skilled with the ball. He scooped it up off the ground with his foot and bounced it up and down on his knees until finally he let it drop. But as he was about to kick it, he slipped in the mud, and instead of driving the ball towards the goal, he sent it up into the air, and it soared over the nave of the church and landed in the graveyard behind it. His two elder brothers looked at him as he lay on the ground and chorused together, "Roland!" Meanwhile, their sister, Ellen, skipped off to fetch the ball from behind the church. But she was not careful to go around the church, keeping it on her right-hand side. No, instead, she circled the church on her left. In other words, she went widdershins. In superstitious times, it was considered bad luck to go widdershins because the sun travels in the opposite direction. The three boys waited for their sister to return from behind the church, and then they waited some more, but she did not come back. They looked at each other and shrugged. Eventually, Roland went to look for Ellen. He found her footprints leading into the graveyard, but they stopped in mid-track, as if she had vanished into thin air. The mother of these four children was none other than Queen Guinevere. By this time, her husband, King Arthur, was buried on the island of Avalon. His famed knights of the Round Table had dispersed. The castle of Camelot lay in ruins, and she now lived with her children in a townhouse in the northern city of Carlisle. When the three boys told their mother how their sister had disappeared, she was distraught. "Oh, my Ellen has been taken by the king of the elves," she declared. "Only the bravest knight in all of England can save her. Where is Sir Lancelot? Where is Sir Gawain? What has become of Sir Eric? They are all gone. Nobody is here to defend us." "Mother," said the eldest of the sons, "it's no use calling on those names of old. They are long gone, but do not despair. I shall travel to the land of the elves and rescue my sister." "No, no," pleaded Guinevere. "I cannot lose another child." But what son of Arthur could leave his sister at the mercy of the elves? Young though he was, he mounted his steed and set off on a quest to rescue Ellen. He departed over the hill and did not return. For a whole year he was absent, and still they received no news of him. And then the day came when the second eldest son mounted his steed and swore that he would bring back his lost siblings. Guinevere cried and begged him not to go, pleading, "I must not lose a third child." But all in vain. He was, after all, a son of Arthur, and the knight's code was deep inside him. And so the second son disappeared and did not return. A year passed, and the last and youngest of the family, Roland, came to his mother and said, "Mother, I see how you grieve every day for my sister and my two older brothers. You think that you shall never see them again. But have faith. I tell you, you are mistaken, for I shall rescue them from the land of the elves." "No, no, this cannot be," pleaded Guinevere. "Is it not enough that I have lost a husband and 3 children? You are all I have left. Do not leave me." But Roland was a true son of King Arthur, and he could not turn his back on a challenge. "Dear mother," he said, "do not worry. I will enlist the help of father's most trusted friend. If I follow his advice, I cannot fail, for he knows more than any other person about magic, fairies, and elves." And his mother knew exactly whom he was referring to, none other than the famous wizard, Merlin. After the passing of King Arthur, Merlin retired to live deep in the woods where he kept a log cabin. In the woods, he could find most of what he needed to experiment with medicines and spells. The children of Guinevere and Arthur were among the few people who knew how to find him, because he had been their teacher. The wooded hillside was teeming with magical beings. Roland knew, because Merlin had taught him, that a rabbit or a deer might contain the soul of an enchanted princess. There were fairies there too, and sometimes they bewitched human beings and kept them prisoner for 100 years. Fairy kidnappings did not happen often, but as Roland led his horse along the woodland path, he kept his hand on the hilt of his sword, just in case. He found Merlin sitting at a table outside his hut. The old wizard was sorting through some mushrooms, picking out the most magical, and making sure that he had not picked any that were poisonous. When he saw King Arthur's youngest son, he greeted him and went inside to prepare a welcome drink out of herbs and berries. Then they both sat down at the oak table. Roland told him how his sister had disappeared behind the church, and how his 2 elder brothers had departed to rescue her, but had not returned. "I must succeed where my brothers have failed, or else I shall break my mother's heart. This is why I have come to you, my father's most trusted friend and adviser. Merlin, if you make me a knight of the Round Table, I am certain to achieve victory." But Merlin shook his head and said, "You must earn your spurs before you can become a knight. I shall give you the title Child, which applies to one who seeks the honor of knighthood. If you travel to the land of the elves and bring back your sister and your 2 brothers, only then can I dub you with the title Sir that belongs to a true knight." "Thank you, Merlin," said Childe Roland. "I shall succeed by the grace of God. But do you have any advice for me? From the moment you enter the land of the elves to the moment you depart, no food must pass between your lips, not a crumb, not a morsel, no matter how hungry you are. If you obey this rule, I believe that you shall succeed where your brothers failed." "Thank you," said Roland. "I will do my utmost to be worthy of your faith, and now I must be on my way." And Merlin replied, "Hold on a moment. Before you go, I have something to give you. Wait here." Merlin went into his hut and returned with a magnificent weapon. "This was your father's sword. Its name is Excalibur, and it has never struck in vain." Childe Roland went down on one knee and thanked the wizard for the great gift. Now he knew that he had the wizard's trust. He set off in search of the land of the elves. He rode along dusty roads, over crooked mountains, and across ominous moors. He passed many nights out in the open, cold, wet, and hungry. Eventually, he reached the land of the elves. There he met magical people who were not so different from human beings, only much larger, including those who looked after cows, horses, and pigs. He asked them all for directions to the castle of the king, and they all claimed that they did not know the answer to his questions. He suspected that they were lying and rode on. Eventually, he met a woman feeding her hens. "Well, young lad," she said, "if you wish to meet our king, you must ride 3 times around the green hill. Be sure to travel widdershins. Each time you go around, you must call out, 'Open up! Open up! Let me in!' And eventually the door of the castle shall open for you. But beware of the king of the elves. He keeps little human beings captive in his castle, he does." "I can take care of myself," said Childe Roland, tapping his father's sword, Excalibur, that had never struck in vain. "Here, laddie, take some of these eggs, for you look half-starved." Childe Roland looked at the eggs greedily, and he was about to accept the gift when he recalled Merlin's warning not to eat any food while he was in the land of the elves. "Thank you for your help, but I have no time for food," he said, and he rode off in the direction of the green hill. Just as he had been told, he rode around the hill 3 times widdershins and called out, open up, let me in." And eventually, just as the woman had said, a door opened up. He tethered his horse to a tree trunk that was hollowed out, with a hole in it that gaped like a dead mouth. Then he passed through the door into the hillside. At first, he found himself in an arched tunnel with an eerie light that did not come from either windows or candles. He walked along the tunnel until he came to some double doors which he pushed open. Now, he was in a magnificent palace. The ceiling was as high as a cathedral's and was supported by huge Gothic columns. An immense lamp hung on a gold chain, and at its center, a black lump of coal emitted brilliant rays like the sun. The light danced on the multicolored jewels, shaped into leaves and flowers, which crept around the floor of the hall like an ornamental garden. At the back was a giant couch made of velvet and silk, and seated on the couch he saw his sister Ellen combing her golden hair. She was not at all surprised or excited to see her brother, because the king of the elves had put her under a spell that made her slow and docile. He went up to greet her, and she said coolly, "Your brothers came before you. Now they are prisoners in the Dark Tower and are nearly dead. You should not have come here. The same fate shall befall you now, and our mother will have lost all her children. I have promised her that I shall rescue you all," said Roland, tapping his father's sword, Excalibur, that never struck in vain. "May God help you, you poor, helpless fool," said his sister. She put down the comb and slowly arose from the couch before fetching a golden bowl of milk and bread for her brother. "Thank you, sister," he said. "I have never felt hunger such as this." She looked at him with eyes full of pity, but could not warn her brother not to eat the food because of the spell she was under. He was about to take it when he recalled Merlin's warning, and he said, "But I cannot eat until I have rescued you." Then a giant voice boomed from the tunnel. "Fee, fee, fo, fum! I smell the blood of a British man. Childe Roland to the Dark Tower came." The voice was followed by the giant king of the elves, who smashed through the double doors. Childe Roland drew his father's sword, Excalibur, that never struck in vain. The elf king was large and strong, but Roland was quick and nimble, and eventually he beat the king into submission. He could have cut off his elfin head, but instead he gave him a chance for survival. Release my two brothers, and grant all of us safe passage from the land of the elves, and only then I shall grant your life," he declared. The king agreed to Roland's terms. The brothers were lying in a trance in a cell of the dark tower. The king took a little phial of colored liquid and sprinkled it on their foreheads, and they came to. He did the same for Ellen, who also snapped out of her trance. Then the four children departed for England, their home, and their mother, Queen Guinevere. Childe Roland to the dark tower came. His word was still, "Fee, fee, fo, fum, I smell the blood of a British man." And the poet Robert Browning wrote a poem called "Childe Roland to the dark tower came." The word child with an E on the end means the son of a noble who is yet to win his spurs as a knight. The tale does not tell us how old Roland is, but we do know that he is the youngest of the children. The traditional story ends with Roland defeating the Elfin King in a sword fight and rescuing his siblings. We wondered what happened next to the children of King Arthur. Tradition does not tell us, so we decided to use a little imagination to fill out some of the blanks. The four children of Arthur departed from the dark castle. They had 3 horses between them. Ellen, who had arrived at the castle by the king's elfin magic, did not have her own mount. She sat sideways behind Roland on his palfrey. A palfrey is a kind of aristocratic horse used in the Middle Ages. It does not trot, but ambles with a long, smooth step. The way home led them along a high pass between 2 crooked mountains. Dark clouds hung not far above them, threatening a cold drenching of rain. Ellen hung onto Roland's belt made of metal chain that was wrapped twice around his scrawny waist. Their father's heavy sword, Excalibur, hung from the same belt, inside a scabbard studded with jewels. On his left arm he carried a battered shield, filled with dents, the marks of their father's many battles and encounters. Under the mud, grime, and blood spatters, it still bore the family symbol of a dragon. Roland was even younger and punier than his father, Arthur, had been when he first drew the sword from the stone. He was just 13 years old. The eldest of the brothers was called Benedict, and he was the son who looked most like their father. He had the same strong brow, thick chin, and blazing eyes. Naturally, he thought that their father's sword and shield belonged to him, but Roland told him, "Merlin entrusted them to me, and gave me the title child to denote that I shall be a knight one day." "But the weapons look all wrong on you. You're too young and weak to be a knight," insisted Benedict. "So? I defeated the Elfin King, did I not?" And so they rode on. They came across the stone hut of an elfin shepherd who looked after sheep and goats. The middle brother, Edmund, said, "Wait here. I'm going to buy some milk and cheese off this elf." But Roland rode in front of him, saying, "Stop. We must not eat anything until we leave the land of the elves. I'm weak with hunger. Who says we can't eat?" "Merlin. He gave me instructions. We must leave this land first, so the faster we go, the sooner we'll eat." At least the sun came out when they reached the lower slopes. They stopped to drink from a spring and looked enviously at the horses as they nibbled the grass without any ill effects. At night, they slept under the stars, feeling sharp hunger pains, and in the morning they rose early and continued. "I'm so hungry, I'm not sure I can go on much longer," complained Edmund. "How will we know when we've left the land of the elves?" asked Ellen. "When we start to see people who don't look like they're elves," said Roland. They rode on into the evening. All of them were weary and saddle-sore. "Ow, my buttocks hurt," complained Roland. "How do you think your horse feels carrying the two of us?" asked Ellen. It was late in the evening when they rode into a village with an inn. Through the window they could see a blazing fire and people, or were they people? Elves were not so different from humans at a distance. In general, they were tall and slim, with delicate skin and fine features. They often sported a mass of lustrous blonde hair. "I don't care if they are elves. I'm going inside," said Edmund. "If I see another elf, I'm going to go crazy," said Ellen. Edmund dismounted from his horse and walked on wobbly legs into the inn. The others waited, swaying in their saddles with faintness. A few minutes later, Edmund came back and said, "What are you waiting for? There are people inside and the kitchen is working. Not an elf in sight. I've paid for 4 beds." Almost every muscle ached as they dismounted, tied up their horses, and walked the short distance to the door of the inn. But once they were inside, they immediately felt revived. The mixture of warmth, human chatter, and smells of food was the best medicine. The innkeeper who welcomed them was no elf. He was round and red-haired with freckles on his nose. "Come in, young strangers," he said. "My daughter is preparing your room. Will you be eating before you settle down?" "Yes, we'll eat a lot," said Edmund, putting a silver coin on the bar. "We're really, really hungry." "We've just come from the land of the elves where we could not eat," added Ellen. "Well, young noble lords and young lady, sit down, and we'll bring you a feast fit for royalty. You can put your things down here. I'll take them upstairs for you." But when he offered to take Roland's sword and shield, the boy said, "These never leave my sight." "They are fine weapons," said the innkeeper, admiring the golden sword hilt and the jeweled scabbard, "but a little unusual on one so young, if I may say so." "Can we sit near the fire?" asked Ellen, who was feeling frozen. "Yes, my dear. I'll move a table over for you," said the innkeeper. And while he was doing that, Roland propped Excalibur and the shield against either side of the fireplace. One of the guests at the inn looked up from his drink and said, "If I'm not mistaken, that's the ensign of Uther Pendragon." And the eldest brother told him, "I am Benedict Pendragon, and these are my brothers and my sister." The man raised his glass as if making a toast and then said, "You children are on the young side to be riding out alone. The forests around here are thick with bandits who will be glad to take those fine weapons off you. Thank you for the warning, but we can look after ourselves," Benedict told him. The man still could not take his eyes off the magnificent sword. Eventually, he stood up and went over to the fire to admire it closer up. He reached out to touch the hilt of Excalibur, and Roland sprang over, upsetting a tankard and spilling drink on one of the guests. But he need not have worried. When the man's fingers touched the hilt of the sword, he recoiled. "Ah!" he groaned. "The fire has made it red hot." His friends roared with laughter. However, Roland had no trouble picking up the sword and propping it against the table where they were sitting. The innkeeper brought a hearty meal, but it turned out that the 4 young Pendragons could not eat as much as they had anticipated. They were so starved that their stomachs had shrunk. So they asked the innkeeper to save the leftovers for the morning. They all slept solidly and then ate a hearty breakfast, which was served by his daughter. The horses were also refreshed, and they set out in a northerly direction, taking provisions with them so that they would not be hungry on the way. After they had ridden for about half an hour, the track entered a wood. "Everyone be on your guard for bandits," commanded Benedict, who rode on ahead to check that the way was safe. For a while he disappeared from view, and then the others heard a kerfuffle and the clash of metal. "Ben's in trouble," declared Edmund, and he spurred his horse onward to help. Roland wondered what to do. His sister was riding side saddle behind him, and he knew that if he charged into the fray, she would be vulnerable to falling off or worse. "Ellen, you wait here," he said. "No," she said. "I don't want to be separated from you all." "All right then," he said, drawing Excalibur from its jeweled scabbard. And he charged on ahead, only to be met by his 2 brothers, riding full tilt back towards them with 5 bandits in hot pursuit. Roland held out Excalibur in front of him and yelled at the top of his voice, "Ah!" Excalibur crashed into the shield of the first brigand, and he went flying from his horse. Roland soon engaged the second villain in a sword fight. A third brigand tried to grab Ellen, but he leaned out too far, and seeing that he was off balance, she grabbed his sleeve and yanked him off his horse. She was not a daughter of King Arthur for nothing. Meanwhile, their 2 elder brothers returned to the fray, and together they saw off the bandits, who fled on horseback and foot as best as they could, leaving one of their number wounded and moaning on the ground. Ellen pulled back the visa of his helmet and saw a reddish face they all recognized, none other than their host of the previous evening, the innkeeper. "They came in the night and took me prisoner," he groaned. "A likely story," said Benedict. "Ah, have mercy, help me," said the innkeeper. "We can't leave him here to die," said Ellen. "Yes, we can," said Edmund. "We'll bind his wounds and take him back to the inn," said Roland. "How?" asked Ellen. "He's not fit to ride." "We shall see," said Roland, who took a sheet out of his bag and started to cut it with his knife to make bandages. "If there are any healing plants in the forest, now would be a good time to gather them," he said. "The sap from pine trees can be good for wounds," said Ellen, who had learned many healing remedies from Merlin. "But first we need to clean the wound." "Here," groaned the innkeeper, touching his jacket pocket, which it turned out contained a flask of spirit. "That will do nicely," said Ellen, who used it to clean out his wounds. Of course, the alcohol stung dreadfully, but the pain was worth it. Then Ellen and Edmund went to collect pine sap, which they used to seal up the worst wound before binding it with the torn sheet. Merlin had taught them well, not just to inflict wounds, but to heal them up. When all was done, the innkeeper was just about strong enough to clamber onto Roland's horse, with some help from the boys. They walked the horse back to the inn, with many a groan and moan from the innkeeper. Occasionally, he let out a blood-curdling oath. I think he's going to live, said Ellen with a wink. When they reached the inn, Roland went inside to break the news to the innkeeper's daughter. "Father!" she screamed and came running out. He was propped up by Benedict and Edmund on either side and managed to limp inside. Fortunately, there was a bedroom at the back of the inn where he could lie down without having to tackle the stairs. The boys stood outside the room. "We're helping the man who tried to rob us," complained Benedict. "A true knight shows compassion even for his enemies," declared Roland. "Well, I think we've done enough. We should leave now," said Edmund. But Ellen came out of the sick room and gave the boys a list of plants to buy in the market. She needed them for medicine: radish, bishopwort, garlic, wormwood, and hollow leek. They boys stored some of their valuables, including their shields and helmets, in their room. "I feel uneasy. Don't trust this place," said Benedict as he closed the door. "Don't you remember?" asked Roland. "Merlin taught us a locking spell." He took out his dagger, and with its sharp edge, he cut a lock of hair off his brother's head. He used it to tie the door latch. "Only you can open it now," he said. "I hope so," said Benedict. In the story so far, Roland, his two elder brothers, and his sister Ellen have left the land of the elves. Back in the land of the humans, the first place they come to is an inn where the innkeeper and some of the guests take a keen interest in Roland's sword, Excalibur. When the four young ones move on, they are ambushed in the woods by robbers. They fight off their attackers, who leave behind one of their number wounded on the ground. It turns out that the wounded man is the innkeeper. Even though he has attacked them, they tend to his wounds and take him back to the inn where Ellen and the innkeeper's daughter take care of him. Ellen has sent her brothers out to buy some medicinal herbs. The boys rode into the town, found plenty of common herbs on the market stalls, including nettles, wild primrose, and cowslip, but plants on their sister's list were harder to find. "Good lady, do you sell bishopwort?" asked Edmund to one storeholder. "Bishop what?" Edmund shrugged. "It's got purple bells and it's good for aches and pains," said Roland, who had been an attentive student of Merlin. The two women behind the stall looked at each other. "Sounds like Bettany," said one. "Yes, I remember now. That's another name for it," said Roland. "Well, we don't have any. We also need some wormwood and hollow leek." "What do you need those for?" "Medicine," said Edmund. The market woman scrutinized his face as if she was looking for some mark or special feature. "You must be those young noble wizards everyone is talking about," she said. "We are the children of Arthur Pendragon," he said. "We are not wizards. We are apprentice knights." "So you want to be like them knights of the Round Table? We remember those times. Dark days they were. Dragons, elves, forever wars, always fighting." "How dare you say such things?" asked Edmund. "Those years were the most glorious in history. The noble knights of the Round Table lived without villainy or treachery. They protected the weak and defenseless. They helped widows and orphans. They sought the Holy Grail, and we shall continue their good work." "Well, you won't find them magic herbs here. You best try the nuns. They grow all sorts of strange plants in their medicine garden." And indeed, the boys were able to buy what they needed from the convent that was outside the town. The nuns blessed the healing herbs and asked the boys to kneel so that they could sprinkle holy water on them. Then, as it was getting late, the boys rode back as fast as they could to the inn, carrying the medicine. For the next few days, Ellen and the innkeeper's daughter, who was called Titha, tended to the wounded innkeeper. Ellen boiled the herbs into a paste and used them as a soothing ointment. They also prepared healing herbal baths for the patient and fed him on chicken soup. Every day Benedict would come into the sick room and say, "He's looking better, can we leave now?" And Ellen would reply, "Brother, be patient, healing takes time." Well, ask him why he was riding with the robbers. All in good time, brother, let him rest. Benedict was not happy. He suspected that the innkeeper was part of a plot to rob them of their most precious possession, their father's sword Excalibur. As the eldest of the brothers, he thought he should be the one who carried the famous weapon on his side. But his younger brother, Roland, was adamant. "Merlin entrusted the sword to me." "Well, you better not let it out of your sight," said Benedict, "because if you lose it, you will have to answer to me." Over the next week, the boys took their horses out for gallops over the fields, hunted for game in the woods, and played football with the locals on the village green. Everywhere they went, Roland took Excalibur with him. Of course, playing football with a sword attached to your waist is no easy feat, so he had to lay it down on the ground, always within his sight. The wounded innkeeper was well on the road to recover. Soon he managed to hobble into the main part of the inn to sit with the customers, who congratulated him on his recovery. "Father, lie down. You are not well enough yet," protested his daughter. "I'm not the fool you take me for. All the while I'm lying in bed, you lot are robbing me blind. Free drinks on the house, I'll be bound. Lovely. Only I'm the one that's paying for it." "You talk such nonsense, father." His friends laughed and told him to stop moaning. "Back from the dead, eh? We thought you was a goner. What medicine are you taking? 'Cause I want some of that." Titha said, "We are so grateful to Ellen. Her knowledge of healing is better than any magic. She is like a sister to me now." "Here, I've got toothache," said another man numbly. "Have you got anything for that?" "A little swipe of this ointment on your gum should help ease it," said Ellen, placing a blob of ointment in his hand. He dipped his finger in it and ran it inside his mouth, and then smiled. "You do not lie," he said. "This is powerful magic." The innkeeper sat with the customers until evening, when the boys returned from the hunt, splattered in mud and carrying partridges and wood pigeons for the kitchen. "Congratulations on your recovery," declared Benedict when he saw the innkeeper. "Now you can tell us why you were robbing us before I call the sheriff." Ellen came up to him and said, "Brother, now's not the time." But Benedict had lost patience. He drew his sword and lurched at the innkeeper. Titha tried to get in his way, but he grabbed the innkeeper by the collar. "Confess now, or by the time I've finished with you, my sister will need more than a few herbs to heal your wounds." 3 of the innkeeper's friends pulled out daggers. Edmund and Roland drew their swords and looked like they meant to use them. "Calm yourselves," begged the innkeeper. "Let me speak. I'll tell you the true story. I'm an innocent man, I swear. I'm a man of peace. A fine man of peace who robs your own guests, declared Edmund. Everyone put your weapons away and let him speak, insisted Ellen. Is this how Merlin taught you to act as guests? And Roland said, Yes, no need for weapons or threats. Let him speak. And he returned his father's sword to its scabbard. You see, he said, 3 years ago, there was a fire in the kitchen and the whole inn burned down. You can ask anyone who lives here about it. I'm telling you the truth. Yes, he speaks the truth. We remember it well, said one of his friends. What could I do? I had to borrow money while we built it again. But who could I borrow it from? I don't have rich friends. I had to go to the fairy folk. They are the only ones with gold to spare around here. Benedict scoffed. We don't believe fairies share their gold, he said. You are right. They don't give it away. They demand that I return twice what they lent me. That's their terms. And seeing as I can't pay, they threaten to take my dear daughter. As he said this, tears welled up in his eyes. The very night that your young noble came to my humble inn, the fairy queen came to take Titha. I begged her majesty, no, not her, do not take Titha. I love my child more than my own life. Take me instead. For a long time, the queen insisted on taking Titha to the land of the fairies, but after I begged and begged, she relented and took me instead. A fine story, said Benedict, but it does not explain how you came to join the robbers. I, and all the men who attacked you, were prisoners of the fairies. They force us to rob travelers to repay our debts to them. We have no choice. They use magic to make us commit these crimes. Benedict looked at his younger brothers and sister. Do you believe this fairy tale? Yes, said Ellen. He seems like a good man to me. I've never heard such nonsense in my life, said Edmund. Benedict turned to Roland. And what do you say, young brother? It sounds like a made-up excuse, he said. But anything is possible. After all, so many strange things have happened in this world recently. A true knight does not need petty revenge. Let's leave in the morning. This man can answer to God if he is not telling the truth. And so, they let the inn's cook prepare the game they had caught, and after eating an excellent meal, they retired to bed for one last night under the roof of the inn. We'll continue the story in just over half a minute's time, but first our writer, Bertie, is here to tell us about some modern magic called artificial intelligence. So, Bertie, do you think artificial intelligence could write better stories than yours? Well, that's not for me to say. But I do know that our sponsor, Storybird.ai, can write and read a story that's tailored to you. You can give it your name and 3 things you are interested in, and it will come up with an original story and read it out loud. It's fun. So, ask your parents to please go to Storybird.ai. Kids with the best stories can even win $1,000. So, go to Storybird.ai to create your own podcast story. That's Storybird.ai. Remember Storybird? It lets you get stories just for you. They rose early in the morning just as the cockerel was crowing. The boys saddled up the horses. Ellen wanted to wish goodbye to Titha. She knocked softly on her door, but there was no reply. When she could not find her in the kitchen, she returned to Titha's room and pushed the door open. Inside, Her friend's bed was empty, and on the pillow lay a green sprig of clover with 4 leaves. Ellen picked up the clover and ran to the innkeeper's room on the ground floor. Titha's father was sitting on the bed. "I had a bad dream. I feel something is wrong," he said. "Titha is not in her room. I found this on her pillow," reported Ellen. She unfolded her fingers and showed the clover to Titha's father. "My terrible dream has come to pass," he said. "The fairies have taken Titha." The 4 children of King Arthur and Queen Guinevere gathered in the stable to decide what to do. Roland said, "We have enough gold. We can repay the innkeeper's debt to release Titha from the fairies." But Edmund, the middle brother, held out his hands and said, "Don't you see? This is an obvious trick. Titha has probably gone to stay with a relative. They concocted the whole story to deceive us into giving them gold." "No," insisted Ellen. "I'm certain Titha would never be party to a dirty trick like that. She is like a sister to me now." "I think Edmund is right," said the eldest brother, Benedict. "We must not give them gold. It's a trick." Ellen, her eyes full of tears, said, "Roland, you won't let the fairies keep Titha, will you?" "I have more than enough gold coins," said Roland, "but I won't hand any over to the innkeeper. I shall go to the woods and exchange the gold for Titha myself. That way I shall find out if the whole story is true or just a wicked lie." "Oh, Roland, thank you. At least you are a true knight," said Ellen, and then turning to her other 2 brothers, "You will go with him to protect him, won't you?" "No," said Benedict. "I'm the eldest, and I have warned all along against this foolish trick that we have been falling into. If Roland believes these incredible stories, that is up to him. But I give my order that he cannot take Excalibur with him. It is our father's sword and the symbol of his kingship. It belongs to all of us. He has no right to lose it through his stupidity when he falls into an ambush by robbers or fairies or both." "That's right," agreed Edmund. "This is an obvious trick. You will be ambushed. They won't repeat their last mistake. This time they will come in greater numbers, and you won't be able to fight them off, and you will lose, not just the gold, but the sword that belongs to all of us." "So, young brother, go if you wish, but Excalibur stays with us," said Benedict. "All right," said Roland, unbuckling Excalibur and handing it to Benedict. "Give me your sword. You can look after Excalibur while I am away, but I want it back as soon as I return." Roland needed the innkeeper to show him the location of the fairy circle in the woods. He set up a horse and cart to make it easier for the innkeeper to travel. They set out in the late afternoon. As they were rattling down the lane, Ellen ran out of the inn and jumped up onto the cart. "I'm coming too," she insisted. They drove into the woods until they could go no further. They tied the horse to a thorn tree and walked along a path. As the trees grew thicker and thicker, Roland could not help wondering if they were being led into a trap. It was growing dark. How would they ever find the way out? Eventually, they came to a clearing where a ring of white flowers was like little lights, forming a magical circle. They sat down on a tree log. "What are we waiting here for?" asked Ellen. "You'll see in due course," said the innkeeper. The air was growing cooler. Ellen shivered. "I feel like we are being watched," she whispered. I think I can hear footsteps in the woods, said Roland. Just wait, you will hear music next, said the innkeeper. And he was right. The notes of the fairy music drew closer and closer, and soon a band of little people appeared out of the woods and began to dance around the circle, faster and faster, until all at last the ground opened up in the center of the circle. A bright light arose out of the opening, until it became clear that the glow emanated from a golden crown on top of the head of a tall and elegant woman dressed in green velvet. She was followed by two miniature knights in armor, about half her height. Their raised visas revealed gnarled and fierce faces with alert eyes scanning right and left. The dancers threw themselves onto the ground and chanted in unison, "All hail Sybil, Queen of the Fairy Folk." The light from the crown was bright enough to illuminate the entire fairy ring and the tree trunks that surrounded it. The innkeeper stood up from the log, shielding his dazzled eyes with his hand, and then went down on one knee. "Fairy Queen, I have returned to ask you for the return of my daughter. Innkeeper, we have missed you since you left our company. Your daughter is down below. She is awaiting your return. But I need her with me at the inn, and my friends have brought gold to repay my debt. Good friends indeed. Step forward and show me the color of your gold." Roland stood up and walked slowly into the brightly lit ring, being careful not to step on any prostrate fairy dancers. He did not kneel, but he said, "This purse contains the gold coins." Said the queen. "You will have to bring them down to the fairy treasury to be weighed." "Where is the treasury?" asked Roland. She turned and gestured to the opening in the ground and the steps down. "The treasury is in our world," she said, "beneath yours. But, Your Majesty, you can trust my word. I am Rowland, son of King Arthur. I carry the honor of the Round Table in my heart, so you see there is no need to weigh the gold." "Not all those knights were that honest, you know," retorted the queen. "If you want to repay the debt, it has to be weighed by the fairy treasury. That's the law." "Whose law?" "My law." "All right, then. I will take the gold to your underground treasury. Who will lead the way?" "You shall come with me," said the queen. "I'm coming with you," called out Ellen, running forward. "No, you're not. It might be a trick. You can't stop me. Teetha is my friend, and I will make sure she is released before I return up to the air," she insisted. "Let her come too," said the queen. "You will both be my honored guests, provided that you are honest. But first, before you enter my palace, you must surrender your sword. Humans cannot carry arms in my palace. That is also my law." One of the fairy knights stepped forward. Roland drew his brother's sword from his side, and then, holding it sideways under the palms of his hands, he presented it to the knight, who then turned and showed it to the queen. "I thought you said you were Roland, son of Arthur," said the queen. "I am." "Then why do you carry this human sword? Where is Excalibur?" "Excalibur is with my brother Benedict, who is also a son of Arthur," replied Roland. "Why did you let it out of your sight? Merlin entrusted the famous fairy sword to you, not your brother." "How do you know that?" "Because it is a fairy sword and is our property. It was lent to Merlin by my sister, the Lady of Avalon. She did so without my permission. Well, I did not bring it, Your Majesty. I see that you are cunning like your father, Well, now we shall descend. She turned around and stepped towards the opening in the ground. The queen led the way down the steps, followed by one of the fairy knights. Ellen and Roland went next, and the second knight came behind them. The steps, cut into the earth, formed a spiral like an underground tower. Deeper and deeper they followed the light from the queen's crown, until at last they came to a gleaming golden gate guarded by knights with long axes. They passed through the gate into a bright hall, where the ceiling was held up and lit by shining gold pillars. All around, fairy folk were working at making ornaments, like gold leaves, or apples of rubies and emeralds, or toy mice made out of diamonds. Then they walked through the hall, before descending more steps, deeper into the ground. Eventually they came to a much smaller chamber, in which sat 3 old men with crumpled faces. "These are the fairy bankers," said the queen. "They will weigh your gold." Roland handed over the purse to one of the bankers. He emptied 3 gold coins onto the table. He looked up at the queen with his heavily lidded eyes. "Your Majesty, there is insufficient gold to repay the debt. This human gold only weighs half of our fairy gold. We need twice as many coins." "So," said the queen, pointing a long finger at him, "you tried to deceive me, eh? You are a faithless fraudster like your father. Now you are my prisoner." "Your Majesty," replied Roland, "you have not weighed the gold. No need for weighing. We can see there is not enough. Your Majesty, you said that it was the law that the debt must be weighed. Is this fairy justice? You don't follow your own laws?" The queen nodded. "It can be weighed if you wish. It will not make any difference." The banker put 3 pieces of fairy gold on one side of the scales and Roland's 3 pieces on the other. "Your Majesty," said the banker, "they are in balance." "What kind of trick is this?" demanded the queen. "Your Majesty, there is no trick. You lent the innkeeper fairy gold, and I have returned fairy gold. The debt is paid. My character does not know deceit. I am as honest as my father." "And from where did you steal this fairy gold?" "The king of the elves gave it to me," said Roland, "as a parting gift when we left his dark tower." And Ellen said, "We've paid the debt. Now please will you release Titha?" "You have indeed repaid the debt," said the queen. "I shall show you Titha. We have grown quite fond of her. You will see that she has enjoyed a most comfortable stay with us." They followed the queen along a corridor to another room, in which they found a dining table laid out with fine foods and drink. "We cannot send you home without trying some of our fairy cuisine," said the queen. And then turning to one of the guards, she said, "Fetch the prisoner Titha, so that she may join us for supper." They took their seats around the table. While they waited for their friend, the queen explained what the foods were. There was bread with butter from buttercups, milk and cheese from milkweed, sweet-smelling honey, of course, many berries, grasses, and herbs, some of which were recognizable, mushrooms of the forest, lark's tongues, and hummingbird hearts, and dainty cakes and pastries. When the guard returned with their friend, Ellen sprang up. "Titha!" She ran over to hug her, but Titha seemed drowsy. "Hello, Ellen," she said sleepily. She took her seat at the table but had trouble pulling the chair back. She was clearly not herself. Ellen looked at Roland. They both understood. The food contained magic that made humans sleepy. It was the same trick that the Elfin King had played. The Queen said, "Do not be shy. You must be hungry after all of your adventures." Roland replied, "Thank you, Your Majesty. I don't have any appetite." "Come, a growing boy like you needs to eat if you want to be strong and fight off your enemies." And Ellen, adopting a sisterly tone, said, "Roland, have you been a good boy and taken your tonic today?" "Tonic?" asked Roland. "Yes, your tonic," said Ellen, handing him a little glass bottle. "3 drops in your water before every meal. You know what Merlin says, 'Prevention is as good as a cure.'" She turned to the Queen and said, "He never has any appetite until he's had his tonic." Roland, not sure if he was understanding his sister's meaning, sprinkled 3 drops in his cup of water. "Now drink it all down," insisted his sister. Then, when he handed back the bottle, she gave 3 drops to Titha and put 3 drops in her own water. "Wonderful," she said when she had drunk her own tonic. "Now we can eat." She reached out and put some of the food on her plate. Roland followed her cue. He ate as slowly as possible and as little as was polite. Ellen, meanwhile, took several cakes, and even Titha seemed to wake up and had an appetite. The Queen watched them. At length she said, "I expect you will be feeling tired. Would you like to lie down and rest?" "Thank you, Your Majesty," said Ellen, "but it's time for us to be going. Titha's father and our brothers will be worried on our account." "Yes, we are ready to leave now," said Roland. "But you look so sleepy," said the Queen, "and it's well past bedtime." "Your Majesty," said Roland, "I have never felt so wide awake. We have paid the debt of fairy gold. Now let us be on our way. You gave your word that we would be in no danger." "Well," said the Queen, "I am surprised by your attitude. Guard, escort these young humans back up to the human world. But if any of them grow weak or weary on the way, bring them back here for some rest." "Yes, Your Majesty," said the guard. But Ellen, Titha, and Roland did not grow weary on the way back to the surface. The drops of tonic had been brought by Ellen from the land of the elves. The drops were the same remedy for the magic sleeping potion that the king of the elves had used to revive them. And so Titha was joyously reunited with her father, and Ellen and Roland told their brothers a most interesting true-life fairy tale.